My friends, I welcome you, and hope you find relaxation as today's tale of terror brings us to a peaceful neighborhood that has its collection of small homes, and a community that is very close and offers nothing but smiles and warm greetings. And just recently, a new addition had been added to this area of dull happiness. A family of three, the Sakaguchis, a middle-aged couple and a teenage son, who'd found themselves with a stroke of luck when buying this perfect little home. 2 stories, a single room on the first floor and another on the second floor, a kitchen, 2 bathrooms, a dining room, living room, and a small laundry room, and it was cheap. Which was something that Hiroshi and his mother found to be somewhere between a blessing and a bit concerning. I mean, even though Mr. Sakaguchi felt like it was a steal when he bought the place, and there was nothing wrong nor out of the ordinary with the house, the neighborhood, or the previous owners, it just felt like the price was much lower than the actual worth of the house. That there was something about this perfect small house that had given the mother that paranoid feeling, too good to be true. But aside from that curiosity, everything seemed fine, except for one other thing. Something that captured Hiroshi's attention when joining his mother as she would go down the street and introduce herself to the new neighbors. The house that was on the left of them, it was unlike the other houses within the neighborhood, because this house had no windows, except for one that was on the side of the building facing the Sakaguchi's house, which was kind of weird seeing how you would expect it, seeing how this is the only window. It would be facing somewhere more scenic and convenient, like the street or at least the backyard, not the neighbor's house. Later that evening, it wasn't a surprise that the main topic of discussion during dinner was a fascinating curiosity this family had with the strange neighbors next door. Even after going back a couple times, Miss Sakaguchi trying to introduce herself had came with no success. Nothing but a mystery and some interesting rumors that she gathered from some of the other neighbors. Funny how a small stroll through the neighborhood will leave you with either some bad gossip or an interesting ghost story. So nobody had ever seen the people who live in the house next door, and there was one neighbor who's been living on the street for 10 years, and not one time had she ever seen anybody leave or enter the house. And there was also the rumors that on some nights you might see a middle-aged woman near the window when taking an evening walk. But what was also interesting was that the former owners of the Sakaguchi house had a son who was a couple years younger than Hiroshi, who ended up running away. And even though the family had spent some time swearing that their son was missing, like kidnapped, the neighbors, police, and everybody else thought differently because of how the boy was rebellious, defiant, and had made it known that one day he was going to end up running away. But for the younger member of the Sakaguchi family, who was feeling a bit moody, probably because of how he was in the middle of some boring gossip, felt like he had his fill of appetite for a meal that was barely touched, and would rather excuse himself so that he could go to his room upstairs and spend the evening unpacking and sorting. Reluctant, unenthusiastic, not an ounce of joy nor excitement within Hiroshi. Maybe a teenage boy who's going through a moment of depression, or maybe he's just not satisfied with his father's choice of a family home. But when he opened the window, that was when our pouty teenager was introduced to an uncomfortable sensation, kind of giving him that tickle on the spine. The whole time, Hiroshi had never realized that the window on the strange house was not only facing their house, but was directly across from his bedroom window. It was strange, something that seemed a bit off. Of course, Hiroshi just shrugged off that weird feeling and began setting up his room for the night. That evening, a Souls night that would violate Hiroshi's slumber with a haunting voice. At first, the boy had simply passed it off as the neighbors being impolite with their surroundings. But when focusing on the voice, that ungodly sound, it was a woman's voice calling out to a boy, deep, crackling, and would end with a seductive pitch that gave Hiroshi a great sense of discomfort. In investigating this strange occurrence outside of his room, opening his window and be greeted by the sight of a woman who was sitting at the window across from his room. The resident of the strange house, the local ghost story that was now in the flesh. It was a moment where Hiroshi began to experience a sense of fear that would clutch his spine when realizing that this woman was trying to get his unwanting attention. And when our disturbed boy had gotten a clear look of his strange neighbor making eye contact with this woman, was the moment where Hiroshi's mind began denying his touch with reality. The woman who kept calling out for that sweet, shy boy who was hiding in the room just across from her window. Just by looking at her was unbearable. Flesh that was diseased with rashes, riddled with boils, and even decorated with small patches of yellowish-green fungi. Fancying herself with jewelry, a wig that failed to relieve the horrible sight of this woman, and a dress that was terribly outdated and out of fashion. Oh, she wanted to look pretty for our shy boy. But the face, God, the face. Eyes that were dead, milky colored, lined with layers of crusted pus. The face covered with boils upon boils, and a smile that would offer a set of jagged teeth that were elongated and incredibly disfigured, coated with a flow of thickened saliva that would hang loosely from her mouth. Oh, she was definitely enjoying the sight of Hiroshi, that shy, handsome boy next door, and why not invite him over? With the front door being open, he can come over right now, and together they can play and do other things. The sight of this woman, her monstrous and seductive voice that would give Hiroshi a new meaning of fear, was a moment where Hiroshi refused to accept the idea that he was awake. Just a surreal nightmare, a night terror, that's all it was. A bad dream. And that's when our boy had forced himself back to bed and succeed on sleeping through that horrible voice that would violate his mind and infect it with a lingering terror. The following day was nothing but a sufferable horror for Hiroshi, a boy who was shaken by such a vivid nightmare, like an evil that was hiding within his shadow, just waiting for the right moment to make its move. But as Hiroshi spent his day contemplating the details of his horrid dream, questioning his touch with reality, eventually, reluctantly, Hiroshi had found himself convinced that the strange woman next door was nothing more but a bad dream. But as our boy would spend the following night within his room, he had once again found his moment of slumber being interrupted by not just the dreadful sounds of a crackling voice, but the sounds of something pounding against his closed window. From the distance, beyond the window, was her terrible voice, wanting to know if that handsome boy next door was awake, curious as to why he didn't come over last night for some snacks and goodies, and to have some fun. So with the boy being shy, why not come over, pay a special visit? And when Hiroshi decided to investigate the disturbance outside the window, with an inner fear of learning why there's a thudding sound against his window and wall, opening the window had not only reintroduced Hiroshi to the horrendous sight of this ungodly creature that was at the window next door, but was literally petrified when seeing the pole waving its way towards Hiroshi's window. Absolute fear in its potent form. The kind that would have you feeling like a hand clenching around your beating heart, deprive you from your common senses, like your whole body is put on suspended animation as you're helpless and forced to witness the horror unfold itself and perform its wonders. Hiroshi was now somewhere between reality and fantasy, his mind trying to accept the existence of this vile monster who was trying to use the pole as a way to get into Hiroshi's room. The continuous thoughts of who, what, when, where, and why continuously flooding his mind, not knowing how to respond, until he heard the sudden thud of a pole landing on the edge of his window, and finally regaining control of his senses. Immediately, Hiroshi pushed the pole away and watched as it landed on the grounds below before screaming for his parents. That night, Hiroshi had once again found himself challenging reality when his moment of terror had his parents investigate the scene within his room. Except when the small family looked outside their son's window, they not only found no signs of the woman, but the pole that had fallen on the ground was missing, meaning that there was nothing that supported Hiroshi's bizarre story. And even though it looked like Hiroshi had a bad dream, another one, the boy was fully convinced of what he'd seen. And it was probably because of the rumors around the street. Even his own mother was somewhat convinced that Hiroshi may have seen something. So, after a long discussion that night, Hiroshi and his parents had decided that it would be best to switch rooms for a while, until the parents and Hiroshi can figure out what's going on. As days went by and months passed, Hiroshi and his parents have found no signs of a woman who would be lurking at the window at night. And even though Hiroshi's mother had tried to relieve her concern by making the effort of introducing herself to the neighbors next door, there was still no signs of life within the strange house. And that's what it was like since Hiroshi began sleeping downstairs. Peaceful, quiet, no sounds of a dreadful voice that haunted his midnight slumber. Not even a thin crack on the window next door when his mother would check the strange house during some nights. Basically, it was quiet and peaceful. And eventually, Hiroshi and his family began to question that terrible night. A horrible memory that would be weighed down by doubt. Just enough to finally accept the possibility that the woman next door was nothing but a bad dream. And with reluctance, Hiroshi had finally accepted his father's wishes of overcoming his fears by moving back into his room again. And when Hiroshi gazed upon the window before enjoying his evening slumber, the boy was fully convinced that there was no way the woman would come back again. Simply because she wasn't real. It was all a bad dream. That night, my friends, our boy, Hiroshi, was once again awakened to the vile sounds of a voice that had greeted an old friend. It was her, that woman. Oh, how she missed her sweet, handsome boy. How long it's been since she last saw him. So desperate, so excited to see his face again. Such a feeling that could not be contained any longer, which is why the woman is now coming over to see this handsome young man. And hearing that voice once again had altered Hiroshi's fear with fight rather than flight, when realizing that the voice was much closer this time, like the woman was right outside his window, and somehow, some way, she'd found herself making her way across, and just inches away from touching Hiroshi's window, begging and pleading for the boy to open the window when she's capable of knocking on it. Almost there, just a couple more inches, and sadly, Hiroshi's window was too far for her. The woman could not reach it. But tomorrow, oh yes, tomorrow, she'll make it. and she can finally come over and have some fun with that handsome boy next door. That night, Hiroshi had not slept, overwhelmed by fear and anger, knowing that the woman would disappear if he were to fetch his parents. The poor boy had spent his night anticipating the moment where the woman would knock, or even open his window, so that Hiroshi can seize the opportunity to push her away from his room and fall to her death. Thankfully, or unfortunately, there was no knock on Hiroshi's window that night, and even though it seemed that our poor boy was without hope, a victim to a continuous nightmare, the following morning had came with an unexpected relief to this terrible horror. When Hiroshi and his family had gazed upon the strange house the following morning, and what they saw was not only proof of Hiroshi's dreadful story, but the fact that the window next door was literally coming for Hiroshi. I think that's when the Sakaguchi family have felt that it would be best to move again, immediately. And another, just to be different. Well, even though Hiroshi may have escaped the clutches of something that would have adored the company of a handsome boy, it's sad how living to tell the fascinating tale that we've just experienced won't be nothing more but a popular ghost story. Anyways, Uzumaki. Fear not, my friends. It's not a scrap project. It's been on the shelf since I decided to share the Hellstar Remina project. And it's also my next story, by the way. Oh, and as for the missing part of the Hellstar Remina that many have noticed, the one where the rich family tries to make their home on planet Remina, as I said before, it will be a separate story that will be told later. But before I make my exit, I would like to introduce the magnificent workings of a Tom Burgess. Now, if you don't already know, Mr. Burgess is highly recommended for his works of horror by the likes of Rue Morgue and even the official Junji Ito Twitter page, and plus more. A man who has a fancy for ghost stories with his collection of graphic novels, and recently one of his works, The Eerie, which has been voted by Rue Morgue as the graphic novel of 2017, and after reading it myself, I can't agree more. Quite the accomplishment. So for details on how to get your hands on these precious works of horror, or you just want to share some love and pester the man into making more graphic novels, you'll find all the links you need within the description below. Until next time, my friends, thank you for enjoying the show.